Alrighty, welcome back, folks. I'm going over the Fuels Week in Review for the week ending March the 21st. That is the ECHL Hockey Week, ending Monday, March the 20th, actually. New week started yesterday, got games starting tonight. Where the Fuel stand in the playoffs, they have clinched the playoffs, the Kelly Cup playoffs, for just the third time in team history. They will participate this upcoming postseason. We are still waiting to see whom the Fuel will play. Right now, they are slated to, as the standings stand right now, playing the Toledo Walleye. So go Utah. Cincinnati has a tough schedule this week in Utah, playing 3 games there. Really like to see Toledo win out. For Toledo to honestly win the division, I'd much rather play Cincinnati in the first round than playing Toledo. I have seen that before, and I really don't want to see it again. We saw that when the Fuel played in the playoffs for the very first time back in 2018. The Fuel were swept 4-0. They did send 2 of those games to overtime, including one to double overtime. So, seen it before, really don't want to see it again. Going against Toledo, just as of right now, they don't match up well with the Cyclones at all. They do match up a lot better with Cincinnati, in my opinion, so that's who I'd like to see. I believe the Fort Wayne has a much better chance against Toledo than the Fuel do, so that's who I would want to see. But with that being said, we'll go ahead and get started. Fuel played just 2 games last week. They started on Friday night at home against Toledo. They did allow the Walleye to score in the first period, and then both teams scored one in the second before the Fuel scored one in the third to send it to the extra session, where the Walleye scored just 56 seconds into overtime to beat the Fuel 3-2 in overtime. And then on Saturday, the Fuel welcomed in Fort Wayne, and the Fuel started off quite a bit better, scoring just 36 seconds in. And I know if there are any Comet fans watching this, it was a penalty. From where I was sitting, it looked like Alex Webman very obviously tripped Darian Keel, and the Fuel got away with it. Because immediately, right after that, after Keel hit the ice, Weidman centered the puck, and Yetman buried it to give the Fuel a 1-0 lead. So, again, from where I was sitting, it looked like an obvious penalty that basically the Fuel got away with. But that's sometimes the breaks. So the Fuel did outscore their opponents 7-5 by beating Fort Wayne 5-2. Scored 2 in the first, scored 2 more in the second before allowing 2 more in the second, and then scoring 1 more in the third, with Logan Nyhoff getting the empty netter with just 49 seconds to play. So far on the season now for the Fuel, they are even in the first period at home, +7 on the road. And then in the second period, they're +12 at home, +6 on the road for +18 overall. In the third period, they're +6 at home and +4 on the road in terms of goal differential for a +10 overall rating. The Fuel are 0-2 this season at home in overtime, but 4-1 on the road. Victories coming in Tulsa, and Tulsa, Fort Wayne. I know that they have won in overtime. Let's go ahead and give a check as to where the other one happened. I can't remember off the top of my head where the final game was in overtime this year. It was in Iowa. Was the fourth game that the Fuel were able to win. So we shall move on from that. Again, that's just an interesting little thing that the Fuel are 0-2 at home. Overall, they are +16 in goal differential at home, +20 on the road. Overall, for a +36 goal differential as it stands right now, moving into this week, where they have 3 home games starting at Friday at home against Greenville, and then 2 games against Kalamazoo. And now that we have gotten into that, we will get into what the Fuel's opponents look like. Fuel lose again in overtime. Their home record finishes against Toledo at 0-2-1 in the 2022-2023 season. With the Fuel losing that game 3-2. Those 2 goals for the first time the Fuel scored more than 1 at home all season against the Walleye. Go from 1.75 game up to 1.8 a game at home against Toledo from 1 goal a game up to 1.33, but they allowed 3 to the Walleye. Toledo drops from 3.25 a game down to 3.2 a game, and on the road against the Fuel, they stay right at their average, which is 3 goals a game against the Fuel. And then the Fuel were able to beat Fort Wayne, and the Fuel further clinching their season series at home against the Comets. They are now 3-1 at home this year against Fort Wayne, so they have clinched the season series, both home and away now. They have one more home game coming up on the 14th of April, and then one more road game coming up the very next day on Saturday, the 15th of April in Fort Wayne. The Fuel scored 5 goals, go from 4.88 a game up to 4.89 against Fort Wayne, and they're averaging 5 goals a game at home against the Comets this year. They hold them to just 2 goals, which is the fewest that they've held them to. 3 straight games they've held Fort Wayne to 2 goals. Fort Wayne dropped from 4 goals a game to 3.78, and on the road against the Fuel from 5 goals a game down to 4.25. And again, the Fuel and Fort Wayne will play next on Friday, April the 14th. The Fuel will take on the Greenville Swamp Rabbits for the first and only matchup of the season between the two teams. This is the first time that the Fuel have faced Greenville since they met in the postseason on June 12th of 2021. That is the most recent matchup between the two teams. The most recent time Greenville was in Indianapolis was on June 8th of 2021. Ryan Bednard shut the Fuel out 2-0 in their only home game of that postseason. The last time that Greenville was in Indianapolis in the regular season was 2 years ago, the 21st of February 2021, when the Fuel shut them out 4-0. That was part of shutouts on back-to-back days. The Fuel shut them out on the 20th of February as well, 4-0. That was after the Fuel lost to them on Friday the 19th. And two teams played 3 games in 3 days. The Fuel lost 4-3 on Friday before coming back on Saturday and Sunday and shutting the Swamp Rabbits out 4-0. Dan Bakala and Billy Christopoulos led the Fuel in those 2 games. For the Fuel, they played home game number 32 all-time against Toledo. Lose in overtime for the 3rd time. Toledo joins Fort Wayne and Wheeling as the teams with the most overtime wins in Indianapolis. Join Fort Wayne and Wheeling. So Fort Wayne, Toledo, and Wheeling have now beat the Fuel 3 times in overtime in Fuel history. The Fuel winning percentage increases just slightly up to .344. which is the 5th worst all-time, or actually, excuse me, it's the 7th worst all-time. 6th worst all-time if you include teams that are still active. There are only 3 teams that are currently active that the Fuel have never gotten a point against at home in their history. That is Reading, Florida, and Idaho. And then the 2 other teams that are active that the Fuel are worse against at home all-time in the regular season is Orlando and Utah, with a 1-3 record against Utah and 1-4 against Orlando. They have a 9-19, 3-1 record against the Walleye. That was game number 32 against Toledo against Fort Wayne. That was game number 52. They got win number 20, which is the second most wins against any one opponent all time at home. Fuel are now 20-24, 3-5 against the Comets. Pardon me, that .462 winning percentage is the 16th best and is actually not too far ahead of Toledo. It's actually the 10th worst winning percentage all-time at home in Fuel history. All-time against Toledo and Fort Wayne. Get the number of games here. That was game number 96, all-time against Fort Wayne. Game number 58 against Toledo. Win number 38, in Fuel history against Fort Wayne. They're 38-44, 8-6 all-time against the Comets, a .469 winning percentage. Losses in overtime, that was their 4th overtime loss ever against the Walleye. Just a .328 winning percentage for the Fuel all-time against the Walleye. That's the 8th worst in team history. Fort Wayne, not that much better. They are the 10th worst all-time against Fort Wayne as well. Fuel will take on both Greenville and Kalamazoo this week. They've played 30 games at home all-time against Kalamazoo. The Fuel are 28-1-1 with 30 games played against them. And against the Swamp Rabbits, they are 5-2 all-time at home against Greenville in the regular season. So just those 7 games played. That's .714 winning percentage, by the way, is the 9th highest in Fuel history at home against any one opponent. So we will move on from our all-time stats there as we prepare for the Swamp Rabbits and the Fuel coming up on Friday night. And when we move on to Indy Fuel coaching stats, we'll just see where Duncan Dalmao sits in terms of what he's done this season and where those numbers rank against the Fuel's all-time coaching stats in terms of what other coaches have done in Fuel history. The Fuel are up to 37 wins and 21 regulation losses, and they get their third overtime loss of the year. The Fuel now with 215 goals scored, 179 goals allowed, and 858 penalty minutes. Fuel now just 4-3, excuse me, in overtime. 4-3 in overtime this year. And as I mentioned, 0-2 at home, and then 4-1 on the road. With their only road overtime loss coming in Cincinnati. Fuel were not that productive on the power play this week. The team going just 1 for 11 without allowing a shorthanded goal, which drops their power play percentage from 21.9 down to 21.4. Their penalty kill was not fantastic, but it wasn't terrible either. Penalty kill was 6 for 7, allowed just one power play goal, the 47th power play goal that has been allowed this season by the Fuel. They were shorthanded 7 different times, 283 opportunities now on this season, increasing their penalty kill from 83.3 up to 83.4. A little bit of analysis for that. I know that there was only 2 games. A little bit concerning, though, that the Fuel's power play went 1 for 11. But you're going to see that when you get that step up from opponents. That's something that, as the Fuel, for the rest of the season, they currently have a relatively light schedule right now in terms of overall league standings. Right now, Greenville's sitting in second place, so you have the 1 game against Greenville, you have 2 left against Fort Wayne, and then 1 against Toledo, 1 against Cincinnati. So with the Fuel having 11 games left on the season, 6 of those are against non-playoff teams, 5 of those are against playoff teams. You only have 2 road games left against current playoff teams. That's at Fort Wayne and at Toledo on the 1st of April. So at Toledo on the 1st and then at Fort Wayne on the 15th of April, the last weekend of the season. Again, 2 of those 3 road games left are against current playoff teams. But again, a relatively light schedule coming up for the Fuel in terms of what their opponents are. That's not to say that they can take a step back, obviously. Again, with Greenville fighting as hard as they can for a playoff spot. Again, excuse me, Greenville's in 3rd place, not in 2nd, in 3rd place in the South Division. So you have Greenville in 3rd, and then 2 games against Kalamazoo, who is, at this point, I don't think they've officially been fully eliminated from the playoffs. They have not, but they are very close to getting to that point. And then the same thing with Wheeling coming up on the 31st of March. Wheeling has not been officially eliminated from the playoffs yet. They're very close to that. Fort Wayne's magic number to eliminate the Nailers is 6. So Fort Wayne has a chance to do that with 3 games against Rapid City coming up this week. So you have 4 home games left against Kalamazoo this year, and then 1 on the road against Kalamazoo. So we have 5 games left against the K-Wings. The K-Wings are making there's a lot of movement going on. I think that they're just kind of looking for what they have. I do understand a little bit of the frustration from the K-Wings fans in terms of just trading for players, and then with Joel Martin just bringing in all of these new faces. I do understand some of that frustration, but you really just kind of see what you have, evaluate pretty much your system itself to see whether or not that you need to change your system. I think that Kalamazoo is enamored with Joel Martin, and they should be. I think he's a really, really good coach. I think he just ran into a buzzsaw this season. I think Indy, Toledo, and Cincinnati have just kind of run away with the division this year. I think for the Fuel, they've played very, very well against Kalamazoo this year. Against the K-Wings, the Fuel have put together so far an 8-3 record, including 5-2 in Kalamazoo. They still do have 3 home games left against the K-Wings, so there is a possibility they could lose the series at home, but they have already clinched the road series with a 5-2 record with only 1 road game coming up in Michigan. So Fuel have a lot of business left to handle on this season. Now let's get back to the Fuel coaching stats. On the season, the 37 wins for the Fuel tie the franchise record for the most wins in team history. They are 3 regulation losses now back of the fewest in a single season. That is the 8th most in a single season in team history. They have lost 3 games in overtime this year. That is 1 back of the tied for 3rd most in team history. That has happened twice in Fuel history, including their inaugural season of 2014-15, and also happened in the 2015-2016 season. The Fuel have accrued 77 points in the standings. That is 1 back of the 2nd most in a single season in Fuel history. That happened in the 17-18 campaign when the Fuel made their playoff debut. The Fuel scored 215 goals this season. That is now 15 back of the 3rd most in a single season. And then 179 goals allowed by the Fuel this season. That is 20 back of the 7th most in a single season in Fuel history. And the Fuel have accrued 858 penalty minutes this season, which is 144 back of the 5th most in a single season in Fuel history. They have played 7 overtime games now, which is now just 1 back of the 4th most in a single season in team history. That was when they had 8 overtime games that they played during the 2017-2018 campaign. And give me just a few seconds here. And I'm having some technical difficulties right now. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay. Fuel won 4 overtime games, which is now just 1 back of the 4th most in a single season in team history. That was the 5 wins they had during the 18-19 campaign. The Fuel have now scored 53 power play goals, which is now tied for the 3rd most in a single season in team history. 5 back now of the 2nd most in a single season in 5 back of the 2nd most in a single season in Fuel history. That was the 58 that they scored in their inaugural season. They've had 248 power play opportunities, which is 3 back of the tied for 5th most in a single season, while allowing just 9 shorthanded goals. And that is currently tied for the 3rd most they've allowed in a single season in Fuel history. The record is 12. Fuel converting their power play at a 21.4 clip. That is currently the 2nd best power play rate in a season in team history. The only time they converted better was during the 17-18 campaign when they converted at a 22.8 rate. Fuel have allowed 47 power play goals this season now, which is just 3 back of the 4th most of the single season in Fuel history. The team record is 61. Pardon me. The Fuel have been shorthanded 283 times so far this season. That's just 6 back of the 4th most in a single season in team history. They have scored 13 shorthanded goals, which is tied for the 2nd most in a single season in team history. The most they've ever scored was the 16 that they scored last season. Right now, the Fuel's penalty kill converting at an 83.4 rate. That means they kill off 83.4% of their penalties without surrendering a power play goal. That is currently the 2nd best percentage in team history. Just worse than the 2015-2016 season under Scott Hillman, when the Fuel converted at, or combination, of Scott Hillman and Bernie John, when the Fuel converted at an 85.5 penalty kill rate. Under Duncan Dalmao, now the Fuel have played in 78 games. He has 48 wins, which is 10 back of Hillman for the 3rd most in team history. 27 regulation losses and 3 overtime losses for Dalmao, 99 points in the standings, 30 now back of Scott Hillman for the fewest so far. Duncan Dalmao's teams have scored 278 goals, allowed 231 with 1,111 penalty minutes. His teams have played in 8 overtime games. They are now 5-3 in overtime under Duncan Dalmao. His teams have scored 64 power play goals and have done that in 298 opportunities, while allowing 9 shorthanded goals. His teams are converting their power play at a 21.5% rate. That is the best so far in team history as of right now. And then Dalmao's teams have also allowed 58 power play goals against, well, they have been shorthanded 345 times. Currently, his team's killing their penalties at an 83.2 rate, which is the 2nd best in team history. Worse only than Scott Hillman's teams, whose teams converted, or PK was successful at an 83.8 rate. And now we will go ahead and take a quick break here. We're going to go ahead and check back in, folks. Going to come back with the individual stats for the fuel. Going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with that.